Smoke is rising from a courtyard in the center of Paris. It is mid-afternoon. The smoke is coming from the courtyard of the French Foreign Ministry, the Quai d'Orsay, and what is burning in neat piles are the secret archives of the French state. Inside the building, in a long room with a map on the wall, a 65-year-old British politician has just flown in from London. He stares at the map. He stares at the man in front of him, the most senior soldier in France, the commander of the largest army in Western Europe. And he asks, in his careful, slightly accented French, the only question that matters. Où est la masse de manœuvre? Where is the strategic reserve? The French general looks at him, shrugs, shakes his head, and gives a one-word answer that Winston Churchill will write 9 years later is the most shocking thing he has ever heard. Aucune. None. It is the 16th of May, 1940. The German invasion is 6 days old, and the war is already over. To understand how France lost the war in 6 days, you have to understand that, on paper, France should not have lost it at all. Forget what you think you know. Forget the image of gray panzer columns rolling unopposed across a defenseless country. That's not what happened. In the spring of 1940, France was, by almost every measurable standard, the strongest military power in Western Europe, and the Allies, taken together, were stronger still. Count the tanks. The French army alone fielded 3,254 of them on the northeastern front. The Germans, attacking through the same forests and rivers, had 2,439. The French had heavier armor. They had thicker plate. The Char B-1 bis had a 75mm gun bolted into its hull and could shrug off German shells at point-blank range. Count the guns. The Allies, France, Britain, Belgium, the Netherlands, fielded around 14,000 artillery pieces between them. The Germans had 7,300, 45% fewer. Count the men. France had mobilized nearly 5 million soldiers. The British Expeditionary Force added another 400,000. Behind the front line in Belgium and Holland, another 1 million troops waited. This was not a David and Goliath story. If anything, it was the other way round. So how did France lose? She lost because she had spent 20 years preparing for the wrong war. The First World War had ended in 1918 with a generation of French men buried in the mud of the Marne and Verdun. France had won. France had also been ruined. The lesson her generals drew was simple, and it became gospel. We will never again fight on French soil. We will fight behind walls. So France built the walls. The Maginot Line, concrete forts, underground railways, retractable gun turrets, ventilation systems designed for poison gas. It was the most expensive defensive structure ever built. And it ran along the Franco-German border for hundreds of kilometers, as far north as the Belgian frontier. Where it stopped, and this is the part that matters, was at the edge of a forest called the Ardennes. Steep, wooded, threaded with bad roads, the Ardennes lay in southern Belgium, just beyond where the line ended. And the most respected soldier in France, Marshal Philippe Pétain, the hero of Verdun, had personally declared the Ardennes impenetrable, provided, he said, special provisions were taken. No special provisions were taken. Pétain's view was not eccentric. The French commander-in-chief, General Maurice Gamelin, agreed. He noted in his pre-war planning that the Ardennes never favored large operations. Everyone in the French High Command had reached the same comfortable conclusion. The Germans, when they came, would come the way they had come in 1914, through the open country of central and northern Belgium. So the Allies built a plan to meet them there. They called it the Dial Plan, after the river it pivoted on. When Germany attacked, the best French divisions and the entire British Expeditionary Force would swing north into Belgium, link with the Belgian and Dutch armies, and stop the Germans on the Dial. It was, for 1914, a brilliant plan. The man who had drawn it up, Maurice Gamelin, sat in a converted chateau at Vincennes, on the eastern edge of Paris. From there, he commanded the largest army in Europe. Inside his command post, there was no radio room. There were no live situation maps. Orders were typed up, taken by motorcycle dispatch riders, and driven across the city. A general issuing a directive at noon could expect his army group to receive it by late afternoon. Maybe. The German army, by contrast, ran on radio. Every panzer commander, down to the platoon level, could talk to his neighbors and his superiors in real time. This is the asymmetry that decided the campaign. Not numbers, not equipment. Tempo. France had not built an army to lose. She had built an army to wait. And in the spring of 1940, time ran out. The story of how the Germans found the right plan is itself a small miracle of accident. In January of 1940, a German staff officer named Helmuth Rheinberger boarded a small Messerschmitt courier plane in Münster. He was carrying in a leather briefcase parts of the original German invasion plan, Fall Gelb, Case Yellow. The plan was Halder's. It was, essentially, an updated version of 1914. The main weight of the German attack would go through northern Belgium, exactly where the French were expecting it. It was conventional, it was predictable, and it would probably have failed. Rheinberger never reached his destination. The pilot got lost in fog. The fuel lever was knocked by accident. The engine spluttered. And on the morning of January 10, 1940, the plane belly-landed in a snowy field near a Belgian village called Mechelen, across the border in neutral territory. Belgian police arrived. Rheinberger tried to burn the documents in a farmhouse stove. He didn't quite manage it. The Belgians recovered enough to read most of the plan, and within 48 hours, copies were on the desks of the French and British high commands. The Allies now felt confirmed in the plan they had already drawn. They believed they knew exactly how the Germans intended to attack. Hitler was incandescent. The German high command was thrown into a panic. The plan would have to change. And in that panic, a different German plan got its chance. The plan of a difficult, unfashionable, brilliant general called Erich von Manstein. Manstein had been arguing for months against his own superiors that the proper place to attack France was not through northern Belgium. It was through the Ardennes. Through the forest Pétain had declared impenetrable. He believed the Germans could push 7 panzer divisions and 41,000 vehicles down 3 narrow forest roads, emerge on the banks of the river Meuse before the French knew they were coming, cross the river, and split the Allied front in half. His superiors thought he was insane. They sent him to command an infantry corps in eastern Germany, hoping he would shut up. He didn't shut up. On the 17th of February 1940, Manstein got 20 minutes alone with Hitler over dinner. 20 minutes, a map, and the conviction of a man who knew he was right. By the end of the evening, the German invasion plan had been rewritten. The Schwerpunkt, the center of gravity, would shift from the north to the center. The main blow would come through the forest no one believed could carry tanks. The new plan had no official code name. After the war, Churchill called it Sickelschnitt, the sickle cut. The name stuck. May 10, 1940, 3:30 in the morning. German bombers cross the Dutch and Belgian frontiers. By dawn, parachutists are dropping on the Belgian fortress of Eben Emael, landing on top of it in gliders and silencing its guns within hours. The Luftwaffe hits Dutch airfields. Civilian columns clog every road heading west. In Paris, the alert reaches Vincennes. Gamelin gives the order he has been preparing for years. The Dial Plan goes into motion. The 1st French Army, the 7th French Army, the British Expeditionary Force, every elite formation Gamelin has, wheels north and pours into Belgium. They move fast. By midday on the 11th, the leading British units are on the dial. The French are racing for a town called Breda, deep in the Netherlands, to link with the Dutch. They are doing exactly what the original German plan had asked them to do. They are doing exactly what the new German plan needed them to do. They are walking into the trap. Because while the Allies are streaming north, 3 German panzer corps, 7 panzer divisions, 41,000 motor vehicles are crawling, bumper to bumper, down 3 narrow forest tracks in the Ardennes. It is the largest traffic jam in military history. A French reconnaissance plane spots it on the 11th of May. The pilot reports columns of vehicles as far as the eye can see. The report is filed. It is not believed. By the night of May 12th, Erwin Rommel, commander of the German 7th Panzer Division, has reached the river Meuse at the Belgian town of Dinant, 2 days ahead of schedule. The French would later call his division La Division Fantôme, the Ghost Division, because it kept appearing where it was not supposed to be. By the afternoon of 13th May, 50 kilometers south of Rommel, another German general is preparing to cross the Meuse at a place called Sedan. His name is Heinz Guderian. He commands the 19th Panzer Corps. He has spent his career arguing that tanks should be massed, not parceled out, and that speed beats numbers. He is about to prove it. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon on May 13th, the Stukas come in, wave after wave of dive bombers. The French gunners on the high ground above Sedan, second-line reservists, many of them in their 40s, lose their nerve under the screaming sirens. Some run. Many hold. None hold for long enough. The first German rubber boats hit the water at 1600. Guderian is in one of them. By midnight, 3 panzer divisions have a bridgehead on the west bank. Sedan is now German, and Sedan is 240 kilometers from the English Channel. There is nothing in between. The next morning in Paris, Paul Reynaud, the Prime Minister of France, 62 years old, a hawk in a cabinet of doves, is woken by a telephone call from his commander in the field. He is told that the Germans have crossed the Meuse at Sedan. He listens. He puts the phone down. And he does something that, in the hierarchy of nations at war, is not done. At 7:30 in the morning of May 15, 1940, barely 36 hours after Guderian's crossing, Paul Reynaud picks up the phone, dials London, and asks for the British Prime Minister. Winston Churchill has been in office for 5 days. The line connects. Reynaud speaks in English. Broken. Urgent. Churchill, still half asleep, hears these words. "We have been defeated." There is a silence on the British end. Churchill cannot quite process what he is hearing. So Reynaud says it again, slower. "We are beaten. We have lost the battle." The German invasion is 5 days old. The next morning, 16th of May, Churchill flies to Paris. He lands at Le Bourget under a gray sky. He is driven directly to the Quai d'Orsay. He is shown into a long conference room with a map on the wall. Outside the window, in the courtyard, civil servants are wheeling out trolley after trolley of paper files and feeding them into bonfires. France is burning her diplomatic archives. In the conference room, the men of the French High Command are waiting for him. Reynaud, the Prime Minister. Edouard Daladier, the Defense Minister. And Maurice Gamelin, the Commander-in-Chief. Calm, professional, immaculate as ever. Gamelin walks Churchill through the situation on the map. There is a bulge, a pocket, running west from Sedan. German tanks. He doesn't know how many. He doesn't know exactly where they are. Churchill listens. Then he asks his question. Where is the strategic reserve? Then, in case he hasn't been understood, he repeats it in French. Où est la masse de manœuvre? There is a silence in the room. Gamelin shakes his head. He shrugs. Aucune. None. There is no strategic reserve. There is nothing in the bank. The best of France has already been committed forward, to the dial, to the wrong battle. The bulge running west from Sedan is now a corridor, and there is no second French army left in the country to plug it. Churchill, in his memoirs, will write this. I was dumbfounded. He is 65 years old. He has seen the Boer War. He has seen the Somme. He has seen Gallipoli, which he himself helped engineer. And nothing in his life has prepared him for the words that have just come out of a French general's mouth. The reserve Gamelin does not have is the reserve France would have built if anyone in the French High Command had imagined that this war was even possible. What follows is not a battle, it is a chase. Heinz Guderian, having crossed the Meuse, ignores his orders. Berlin tells him to stop and consolidate. He doesn't stop. He doesn't even slow down. When his radio operator hands him a halt order from above, Guderian, by his own later admission, turns the radio off. He keeps driving west. He carries a personal motto painted on the inside of his command vehicle: Klotzen, nicht kleckern. Punch, don't tap. He punches. By May 18th, his tanks have covered 120 kilometers. By the 19th of May, he has passed the old Somme battlefields of the First World War. By the morning of the 20th of May, 10 days after the invasion began, the leading elements of his 19th Panzer Corps roll into the seaside town of Abbeville. They have reached the English Channel. The map of France now has a long, thin German finger drawn across the top of it. North of that finger sits everything Gamelin had committed to the Dial Plan: the 1st French Army, the 7th French Army, the entire British Expeditionary Force, the Belgian Army, what is left of the Dutch, around 1 million Allied soldiers. South of the finger, there is almost nothing. The trap has shut. In Paris, Paul Reynaud does the only thing left to him. On the night of May 19th, he sacks Maurice Gamelin and replaces him with a man called Maxime Wagon. Wagon is 73 years old. He has not commanded troops in the field since 1923. He arrives at Vincennes from Syria, exhausted from the flight, and announces that his first command decision is to get a good night's sleep. Then he announces that he will need a day to study the situation. That day becomes 3 days. In those 3 days, Heinz Guderian reaches the sea. The British try, briefly, to fight back. On the 21st of May, near the town of Arras, 2 British tank battalions slam into the flank of Erwin Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. For about 90 minutes, Rommel believes he is being attacked by 5 times the actual force. He pulls back. He reorganizes. Then the line holds again, and the British, exhausted, fall back too. But Arras has done one thing. It has rattled the Germans badly enough that 4 days later, Hitler does something almost incomprehensible. He orders the panzers to stop. The 24th of May. Hitler is at Army Group A's headquarters in Charleville. Gerd von Rundstedt, the commander, has already issued a temporary halt order, partly because his tanks need maintenance, partly because the soft Flemish ground worries him, partly because Hermann Göring has been on the radio all morning insisting that the Luftwaffe alone can finish off the British. Hitler studies the map. He confirms Rundstedt's order. The panzers, within sight of Dunkirk, within sight of the only port through which the BEF can still escape, sit still for 3 days. It is the single most consequential pause in the history of the German war. Because in those 3 days, the British improvise something extraordinary. From a command post under Dover Castle, a chamber called the Dynamo Room, after the electrical generator that once powered it, Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay launches Operation Dynamo. 850 boats, Royal Navy destroyers, civilian ferries, fishing trawlers, pleasure craft, lifeboats, anything that can make the crossing from the south of England to the beaches of Dunkirk. When the operation began on the evening of 26 May, the British War Cabinet had been told to expect the rescue of perhaps 30,000 men. Over the next 9 days, the little ships and the big ships together evacuate 338,000 soldiers, French, British, Belgian, Dutch, from the beaches and the harbor mole at Dunkirk. It will be called immediately and ever afterwards the miracle of Dunkirk. But it is, at best, a small mercy at the center of a catastrophe. The men come home. Their tanks, their guns, their vehicles, their workshops, their stockpiles, all of it stays in France. On June 5th, The second phase begins. The Germans turn south. The plan is called Fall Rot, Case Red. Wagon has built a defensive line along the Somme and the Aisne. It holds for a few days. Then it breaks. On June 10th, with the issue already decided, Mussolini's Italy declares war on France and stabs at the Southern Alps. The French army of the Alps, outnumbered roughly 4-1, will hold the Italians off until the armistice. It is the only piece of good news France will have all summer. On the 13th of June, the French government declares Paris an open city. There will be no battle for the capital. On the 14th of June, German troops march down the Champs-Élysées. The streets are almost empty. Most of Paris has already fled south. On the 16th of June, Paul Reynaud, the man who had wanted to keep fighting from North Africa, resigns. He is replaced by the 84-year-old Marshal Philippe Pétain. Pétain has already decided that France will sue for peace. On the 22nd of June, in a forest east of Compiègne, France will discover what humiliation actually looks like. There is, in a small museum building in the forest of Compiègne, a railway carriage. It is wagon number 2419D of the Compagnie Internationale des Wagons. On the 11th of November, 1918, in a clearing in this forest, this carriage was where Marshal Ferdinand Foch had received the surrender of the German Empire and ended the First World War. For 22 years, it had sat there as a national monument. On 21st June 1940, on Hitler's personal order, the wall of the museum is knocked down. The carriage is rolled out. It is placed back on the exact spot it had stood in 1918. At Hitler's direction, German engineers position it precisely. The next day, June 22nd, at 6:15 in the evening, Hitler arrives. He climbs into the carriage. He sits down in the chair Foch had used. The French delegation, Vice Admiral Leluc and 3 colleagues, sit opposite. The American journalist William Shirer is watching from the trees, 20 yards away, recording the scene for his network. Hitler listens to the preamble of the armistice. It mentions by name the humiliation of November 1918. It is read out by Wilhelm Keitel, the chief of the German High Command, in a clearing where the German army had been forced to admit defeat 22 years earlier, almost to the day. Hitler does not stay for the negotiations. He hears the preamble, stands up, salutes, and walks out of the carriage. It is, by careful design, the same gesture Foch had made on the Germans in 1918. The French delegation will sign the document at 6:36 that evening. Wilhelm Keitel signs for Germany. It is the 22nd of June. The campaign began on the 10th of May. 46 days. Outside the carriage, on a patch of grass, a German newsreel cameraman captures the Führer taking a single, slightly stilted step, a little stomp of the foot. A few weeks later, in a London editing room, a Scottish filmmaker named John Grierson takes that one step and loops it. Plays it forward, plays it backwards, plays it forward again. The clip will go around the world as Hitler's Jig. Most people who saw it believed, for the rest of their lives, that they had watched Adolf Hitler dance with joy on the grave of France. He didn't dance. The footage was cut. But the lie carried something true. This was a humiliation so deep that no real footage of it would have been deep enough. The numbers, when they came in, were these: 90,000 French soldiers dead, 200,000 wounded, 1,800,000 prisoners, most of whom would still be in German captivity 4 years later, when Allied troops finally crossed the Rhine. 27,000 German soldiers killed. The Battle of France was, in raw human terms, 10 times more costly to the loser than to the winner. For the next 4 years, France would live 2 lives. In the unoccupied South, an old man at Vichy would govern in the name of order and tradition, collaborating with an enemy whose victory he had helped engineer. In the occupied North, the Wehrmacht would feed itself off French farms and French railways, and in the rooms above the Champs-Élysées, German officers would write home about how much they liked the food. There was a third France too. Smaller, harder, slower to wake up. Charles de Gaulle, an undersecretary in Reynaud's government, had flown to London on the 17th of June, the day after Pétain took over. From a BBC studio the next evening, he broadcast, to almost no one, the words, "La France a perdu une bataille, mais la France n'a pas perdu la guerre." France has lost a battle. France has not lost the war. He was right. But the war he meant would take 4 more years and a different French nation to win. The lesson of the fall of France is not, as the popular memory has it, that France was weak. France was not weak. The French army of 1940 had more tanks, more guns, more men, and harder ground than the army that broke it. The country that lost in May had, in fact, invented modern armored warfare in the writings of a young colonel called de Gaulle, and then shelved his book. France lost because she had spent 20 years preparing, with all her strength and all her treasure, for a war that did not arrive. When the war that did arrive came down through a forest she had decided was impenetrable, fought at a tempo her commander could not match from a chateau with no radio, and aimed at a flank she had emptied to fill the wrong battle in Belgium. There was no time and no army and no answer. There was only Maurice Gamelin in a long room in Paris on the 16th of May, looking at a man who had just flown in from London. There was only the question. There was only the shrug. Aucune. 46 days. That is how long it takes for the wrong assumption, held with enough confidence, to lose a country.